Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon.
Bessi Graham. Remember that name, I will. Not only will I remember Bessi's name, but this spellbinding conversation. Now, you'll hear me ascribing magical terms to this fine consultant whose company is called Benefit Capital. But, I had to go with my feelings. And this is my first meeting with Bessi that you're hearing, and I was enchanted. I called her an alchemist. What is the chemistry that she works with? The best kind, human chemistry. She helps people open up and relax and talk with her as a thought partner about what really matters to them down deep. It also happens that they're a senior leader of a company, and the authenticity that they truly desire emerges in a change. Alchemy brings change that then allows them to change the direction and the tenor of their company. Well, I don't know if I've done credit to the work that Bessi and her partner have been doing for many years, but I can tell you this. I felt change at the end of this conversation. I felt listened to and included, and maybe I discovered a few things about myself, which is not always my intention, but it's nice when it happens. And you, listener, may have the same experience with Bessi Graham. Well, folks, in recent time, I've had conversations with interesting folks in the United Kingdom. And so we said across the pond. Well, now we're going to hear a conversation with Bessi Graham, who is across so many continents and so many bodies of water that we just have to imagine that I'm sitting next to her in Australia, which I would love to be, but I'm not. But it's wonderful to be able to reach out, thanks to Zoom, to have a conversation with Bessi. Now, in our talking with each other before I turned on the recording, we explored a little bit about how she would like to be introduced. And while she didn't say these words, I think I would say that Bessi is the best kind of human alchemist. She's an alchemist. And now she's shuddering and
saying, steal that.
turn off the camera. No, and here's why it came to me, because what she does as a gifted consultant, working with the senior leadership of mainly business organizations, is to help them see that it's through business itself that they can do good while doing well. Mm. And that takes a lot of different ingredients, Bessi, and it's kind of, you have to work them up as a special potion every time you start with a new client. But one of the wonderful things about effective alchemy is that the result, the outcome, is change, a totally changed state of, if it were a physical thing, it would change the physical thing. But in a social thing, which is all business really is, seeing change come from what you've helped them do differently must be a thrill. So what do you think about being an alchemist?
Very happy to take that naming, especially with the beautiful description that sort of accompanied it. I think you're right. I mean, there is this notion of, I'm trying to remember which piece it was in that Plato spoke about, that for each of us, our job is to be the midwife for the other's soul. And it is this bringing out or drawing out of what is already present, but that often people have either forgotten or pushed down, or in amongst all of the busyness and noise, they've just lost sight of it. That's the thing that I love doing, because I think you're right. With leaders, it is just the connecting of dots that they are so unable to see because of they're deep in the weeds, if you like. Mm-hmm. that allows them to then more fully show up and be who they are. That's what I'm doing.
Well, it sounds to me like one of the very first things you help a leader do is find more about themselves through your eyes and through your words that perhaps they have been taught over time is personal, not business. You know, that dichotomy.
Yes.
It's nothing personal there. It's just business. Well, if you've been going up through the ranks and over time and be rewarded more for that, and even sacrificing a lot of your own personal time and loves and things, I can see where you could first have to work a little harder on the top leaders who are most visible to the rest to help them find themselves being absolutely wonderfully more human than anyone ever imagined, including them.
Yeah. And actually giving them permission, because I think you're right. There's a deep connection between part of why we establish these patterns and lose sight of the human aspects or coming more fully to work or, what it is that our brilliance is that we can bring to the world. We've separated those things out in one way because we have been rewarded, the word that you used, we've been rewarded for certain behaviors. We've been rewarded for showing up in a particular way with a persona or a mask that kind of people then gave us the acknowledgement, the position. There was that sense of achievement. And so that becomes a pattern because particular types of people tend to be drawn into, setting big goals, becoming that leader that, naturally puts their hand up in any room. And so the permission to actually say to them, you don't have to perform in a certain way in order to have that role. It takes some unlearning.
So that's some coaching on your part. Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How long and on the average does it take for someone to kind of drop their epaulets a little bit down and relax and maybe loosen their tie or the thing that they're wearing around the neck, the woman who wears those wonderful scarves? It's like, oh, thank God we can talk.
I can breathe. Well, to be honest, I think in some respects it depends how broken or how far they've already gone into the realization that they cannot sustain how they have been showing up or performing. And so my favorite, for something to be in a category where I feel like I can jump in and I can bring my best to the situation, it is actually ideal that someone has already at least had that aha moment where they've gone, oh, this is not all there is. Like, I can't keep doing this. If they still need to have a bit of that convincing, then it's actually better to use the vehicle of something like a podcast or have them interacting with your ideas, but not yet having to be doing the one-on-one, because I think that can take 18 months of just hearing these things and saying, no, I don't agree with that, or hearing it and feeling a little bit of resonance and start to question yourself, but you're not quite ready and you're quite defensive. So part of what I've been trying to experiment with in the last few years is, how do I not put myself in a situation where I'm trying to convince a leader that they have to do their own work first? Like, I can help you with your business model, but we actually need to get some clarity on you first. That's often not what people want to hear. And so figuring out how you share ideas and start to get someone to make that mindset shift, which I think is foundational, is part of why I'm playing with and trying to develop, okay, is a podcast conversation a good way to do that? Is an article or a little video on YouTube? They're all attempts to break down some of those walls, because I do think that in order for someone to really get the most out of engaging with someone like me as their thinking partner, they need to already have an openness and a curiosity at least. I'm very happy for them to disagree with me and argue. In fact, they're wonderful conversations to kind of go through.
That's right. The conversation will do it. Yeah.
Exactly. But you don't want them to be so far away from a realization that they do have to do their own exploration and self-work.
There's so many things I want to say about what you just said, but I'll first restate the word thinking partner, and that then makes it easier for me to understand the blog, the article, all of the other ways that you are saying, hey, here's Bessi Graham, here's who I am, LinkedIn, other places where you can be found. And wouldn't you like to sit down in person, or at least on Zoom, and explore the possibility that if you and I talk a lot and think deeply as partners, that you can institute the kind of changes that your customers, society, and particularly your employees are begging for.
Yes. Oh, exactly.
Because they
it's
are.
So
Those are the times, all over the world. What worked and worked well for managerial leaders in every setting, certainly in the U.S. government right now, nothing that you always did is going to satisfy change. And so here's Bessi Graham. Oh, I heard this cool conversation on a podcast. And then there's links right to you and to your business that says, and if you'd like to know more, let's connect.
Yes. And I think that piece, you're right. So I ask a lot of questions. I think one of the pieces is that if I think about the way someone who position themselves to a leader is saying, I'm a consultant, often it's the aspect of they already know what it is they're selling you. It's this off-the-shelf solution of, regardless of what your context or your challenges are, I have a 7-step program, or, I have this way I do something. And that is not the way that I operate. And I don't think that for the types of leaders and really experienced business owners that I work with, where I think we can have massive impact if we shift the way they think and lead, they're not drawn to that, because part of what is appealing, I think, about the practitioner bit is that there is that curiosity, there is the honouring and respecting of their own expertise and their own experience. But it is, so my partner of 20 years, Brad, he has this beautiful phrase that he always used for me in the early days when I was younger and stepping into situations and feeling like, oh, this person is far more experienced than me. And Brad would always say to me, they bring content, you bring form. You don't have to be an expert. If they are in a business that is in manufacturing, it's not that you need to wait until you know every detail of manufacturing to the same extent or more than they do. No, that's their area. So they have the content. What I need to have, and I think in some ways this starts to move into the aspects around practice, or this distinction between there's theory, and I would talk about tools or heuristics, thinking tools.
Yeah.
I bring the form of, you're an expert in your particular business or your area. You have all of that content. I'm not arguing with you about that, and I'm not claiming to know more than you. But I can come in and look at all of that content. I then have a rich store of different tools and frameworks and ways that I would put a lens over that or pattern that. I then can help you make sense of and draw out, how would we make a decision? How would we prioritize? What are the filters we put over this? And I think that allows people to relax a little bit, in that you're not telling them that you know more than them. You are listening and curious and trying to draw out all of this rich content from them, and then overlaying that with your form or tools to make sense of it.
Together in that process, then you arrive at the marriage of form and content. In a way, I would guess what it does is co-creates a theory of how to move forward that's unique to leadership and unique to what they do in the world. And that going forward, you then release to them at some point, because they're off with their own more clarified idea of how to proceed. And I think that is a great gift that you give the world. If you know, I wish you could do it 200 or 300 leaders at a time, but that would be putting them in a hotel room conference and giving them a TED talk. And that does have some effect. But what you do has a great deal more effect, because you're customizing what.
And I think one of the bits that can help them relax a little bit in that is, if we then, as someone who thinks in this way and has those tools or the different ideas, the different practices that we use, part of what I am exploring at the moment is, can I capture and share those enough that actually a broader group of leaders who may not have the opportunity to work directly with me. So I do agree with you, it's not at the same level of transformative power if you're not able to sit with them as their individual thinking partner. But if I can equip them with some of these different tools, different ways of positioning themselves in looking at an opportunity or a challenge, can they start to feel more comfortable to let go of some of that black and white thinking, that either or way of looking at the world? And are they able to trust those tools enough, and that they are equipped to relax into having more of the mindset that I talk about, which is a both and mindset of saying, two things that seem contradictory can be equally true. And I think that's an exciting place to be playing, to say, if we want to have bigger impact, but we want it to honor their own brilliance, how do I bring what I know and equip more people with that than I could work with one-on-one? That's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think that question, how can I disseminate, is an awful word, but it's it's really the right word. I've said in a number of the podcasts and in the book on practice as a way of being, that the experience is a laboratory. All experience is a laboratory if you come in with an inquisitive mind. But the benefit of a laboratory is bringing out some results that change things for the better. And so if you've been visiting a number of these individual laboratories, you're developing more of a gestalt of what it is to get both and, yes,
both
to
and, kind of switch from either or.
Now you're looking at an 80-year-old man struggling for a few words he just heard, but they're so important words. But the point is that now you've seen a pattern in those mini labs that you've been running, and now you can bring them out through your writing, through your podcast, and I'm sure you give some talks when it makes sense to do so. And here's what I love particularly about that. We academics, which I was for over 50 years, with the PhD and the professorships and all the lovely trappings of the office, which then meant that any setting I went into, I'm a professor, and once I stopped being that, when I retired 7 years ago, I was thinking, wow, wait a minute. I'm having a lot more fun and impact introducing myself as Dave, and then showing genuine interest in what was going on and what do people think about it as Dave, just Dave. So I am now in my 4th year of being a practitioner as a podcaster, conversationalist, and author. Very different. But the big change was in me.
Yes.
Because I often thought that the only reason people even looked at me seriously was that I was Dr. Fearon. Now, you maybe are Dr. Graham, but I don't know if that would make a whole lot of
My
difference with
partner is
what you
Dr.
do.
Graham, but we
There
always
you
joke.
go.
You
can
have
bring
a
one out there
master's.
if you need one.
That's right. I only have a master's degree, so
No,
not
never
as,
say only. But
no,
I'm just
being
trying
silly,
to be a little
Yes. No,
facetious.
exactly right though.
But in terms of access
I
and in terms
understand,
of who pays attention to us.
Mm.
Now, I have also learned what you do very, very well, that if I kept my candle under a bushel after retiring, no one would ever even know Dave, let alone Dave Fearon, with what I do now. So thanks to our mutual friend, Dale Ford Stiegler, and folks that work with them on their branding and marketing, I unabashedly have, a place on LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. And I keep it very populated pretty much every day with something about practice, and therefore me and Peter Vale. I actually love seeing how many people listen. I like to see how many people made a comment on something I wrote and posted, and why. And sure, my ego. I don't know if you've noticed, but I have a huge one. But what I particularly like is, hey, there's one other soul out there who took an instant while scrolling and clicked and goes, that's pretty interesting. I might even write a word or two as a comment. Now, what's your experience, particularly with all those ways you're out in social media?
Yeah, look, I think I really love the way that you've described that. And I think for me, the aspect is, if I think back to many of the sessions I've run or aspects where I've passionately been trying to get people to look at the world differently or think in a different way, I would always say, either at the beginning or at the end of those conversations, this has been a rich and beautiful exploration for us to have, but we want to move beyond the conversation. And part of the piece that my intent is, and that I'm always hoping for, is that in these conversations, or whether someone listens to a podcast or reads something on social media, I want it to be planting that seed. And even if it takes a while, it's, how do I awaken possibility in someone? How do I ask a question or frame something in a way that even if they don't consciously get it straight away, that it does something in their mind that eventually, to use some of your language that we share, what I want is that it actually changes their practice. I don't just want it to be an intellectually exciting conversation. I want it to sink down into that it is actually altering the way they run their business, the way they make decisions, the way they spend money, how they lead their team, all of those aspects. I want those things to, as a result, start to shift.
Yeah, and growing up in the state of Maine, as I did, we had many sayings. And I suspect that may be true of Australians too.
Yeah.
But one of ours was, well, that's a tough nut to crack. To get someone who's a manager or leader at any level in any kind of corporation or government organization to pause from the extraordinary amount of busyness and incomings and what Peter Vale called trying to keep your head up in the white water of change, all of that, to pause and go, what's Bessi saying here? What is she speaking to me? I feel like she's speaking to me. Maybe I should take a breath and listen a little bit more. So you're right. The nut starts to crack a little bit. Now, I had the advantage for many, many of my years in teaching to teach undergraduates in business schools. So they hadn't quite hardened up yet.
True. Yeah, they were still excited.
So what I would be able to do for them is to say, in every course I taught in management, leadership, quality, you name the subject, creativity, I would say, number one, this course is about you at least 10 years from now and maybe well beyond. That's who this course is for. And you and I are working for that future person. And he, or they are going to either remember many years from now what you did as a learner with Fearon, or they won't remember it at all. My job is to make this damn memorable. And I pulled every rabbit out of every hat to do that, to the extent that I was acknowledged as a pretty fine teacher. And I particularly love hearing from former students how they're doing 10, 20 years from now. So back to the nut to be cracked. When you're, let's jump ahead a little bit to how you prepare. As you move ahead and with your pestle and the thing that you make your you make your wonderful magic in, how do you prepare yourself for someone who has said, okay, I'd like to start that conversation and we'll see where it goes? You do look a little bit at what their content is, don't you?
Absolutely.
But then you have to prepare Bessi. I mean, that takes an act of courage, really, every time. Yeah.
And my mind's going in multiple directions here, but if we start with that piece that you said at the end there, part of modeling and sitting in the space of being a practitioner yourself is the old saying of practice what you preach. So to go to that piece of how do I get myself into the right space? If I'm telling other leaders that in order to lead others, you have to lead yourself first, well, then you are correct. There is a getting yourself into a place where you can show up in the way that you need to, where you are able to have those aspects of curiosity and yourself being calm and still enough to be listening to that other person and drawing out and thinking about their context, not having that rapidly moving brain that's already thinking about how the 17 things you wanted to teach them are now fitting in. That piece is critical and I think massively either positively or negatively affects the type of rapport you build with someone, the outcomes that you get. And if we go back to one of the ideas around ego, I think years ago I remember through a few interactions in a row starting to tune into the fact that, you could run a really great session where you looked very clever and where the client went away saying, oh my goodness, that was amazing. And how did you come up with that strategy? And that business model's incredible. But when you checked back in with them later, because you just presented all of this amazing stuff and they didn't own it, they didn't understand how to actually implement or put that into their operational components, you actually were not impactful. All you did was make yourself feel good and make them walk away saying you are clever. And so part of that realization very early on, which was influenced by some of my education. So if we go back to people who have taught you well, both in formal settings and informal, part of that then started to really sink in for me, which was I would then frame my job. I would say when I come into something, whether it's that I'm actually founding and building an organization or if I'm helping someone else on theirs, my job is to make myself redundant. So if I end an interaction with that person saying, well, unless you come in and now implement this for the next 12 months, we can't do anything with it. If that happens, I've failed. So I have had in the early days those situations where it can feel good from an ego perspective. So I did a block where I went in for a month to an organisation in the UK and worked to think through their strategy as they wanted to go international. And the board at the end of the time said, oh, you've done more strategy in the last 3 weeks than we've done in 12 years. And, you know, and it was all of these bits where I was thinking, well, that's a problem that, you know, maybe you need to reflect on. But the reality was it was great work. They chose a really good strategy if you looked at it in isolation to move forward. but their CEO could not implement it. Luckily, he had the self-awareness to admit that and step down. But they were then left in this position where they did ask, could you come over and do it? Now, that's not a good outcome.
No.
And so if we go to your piece, part of what I have learnt over time is the component of sitting with the co-creation piece, the aspect that I'm not trying to give them a new strategy or design their business model for them, because that will actually not get the outcome that we're looking for here. And so I do think there is a separating of yourself and your role and your ego out of your own practice and how you show up.
Oh, my Lord, that sounds awfully difficult. I'm sure it's not something you just decided to do and start doing. So over time, you've become more and more able to know when to drop the curtain on your performance, if you will, and not even make it a performance. Do you see that this approach that you and your partner has how do I say this without sounding crude? Will people buy what you offer these days, or are they looking for come in and take over and get us out of this hole? Is there a bigger and more lucrative market for consulting of that nature than what you offer?
Sadly, yes, I would say that we are still living in a world where there is a massive desire for someone to come in and just tell me the answer.
Make
it simple. Yep.
Yeah. And give me five things.
Yes. What is interesting is seeing, so the component that Brad, my partner, his PhD and he's far more knowledgeable than I am around is what he calls social system design. So the design of the immaterial, how we think, going back to all of the concepts of ancient Greek rhetoric and philosophy, and how does that play out into the way we actually design an organization or a conversation or a political system. What does that look like? And it has been fascinating in the 20 years that Brad and I have been together, seeing how people have more and more had a desire and been drawn to some of the ideas. So design thinking has become popular. Everyone loves the word innovation. There's these different concepts that are actually rich and beautiful and very deep concepts.
Yes.
There is something in people that is drawn to that and that recognizes, ooh, that does sound like it could give me a better outcome. And yet we then have a lot of consulting companies and design firms and people coming in that are having the appeal of that language, so someone can think they're being innovative or using design thinking. But when you look at the actual methodologies and the way that they approach things, it doesn't yet have the depth of what I think is possible when you actually go into that space. So if we were just trying to make as much money as possible, you are correct. It would be about still giving those easy answers and staying in the either or mindset of, yes, it's very simple. Let me tell you what that will look like in 2-week sprints. But I do think, and I have definitely seen in recent years, we are speeding up the adoption and curiosity in many respects out of necessity, not necessarily because people want to, but the necessity for people to realize the way that they previously were able to get results is no longer working. The way they used to be able to see as externalities in a business context things and just ignore them. So you could use resources at a rapid rate. You could grow and scale at a rate. You could push the production of your products out into a cheaper market and ignore the environmental and social damage you were doing. Those behaviors are now far more visible, and the expectations of how transparently you account for them and then have to be taking responsibility, whether people like it or not, that has shifted and it is not going back. So I think there is a need for, and possibly there will be some uncomfortable leaders coming into this space of they don't really want to be working with you in this way, but they realize they have to.
Oh, I'm with you 100%. I certainly agree. It is way beyond time for a different type and caliber of coaching, consulting. Fill in the gaps. It's all the same. Someone who has been a tough nut to crack has now said, "Okay, I'm open this much at least to the fact that I just can't I cannot let things go the way they've been going." We had a rather large crop of resignations during the pandemic here in the States, relatively young CEOs and other senior leaders after a time within the shutdown saying, "Well, I see a lot of my employees staying home and going away. I think I'll have to too." And then now they're home and they're starting to think, "Oh, I have a spouse, kids, I have a dog." and they started to soften up that way and just say, "Hey, maybe pushing everyone back into our building 5 days a week, including myself, and pressure cooking in order to keep something like a business in quotes together is not a good thing. It's not effective management or leadership." And so I think it's coming. And now that you'll be featured in my podcast, Bessi Graham, you'll have so many people knocking on your door. I want to have a thought partner in Bessi Graham.
Yeah, and I would love that in the way that, again, if we go back to each person being able to see the fullness of their own experience and their own brilliance coming into the world, I think what can be really overwhelming for a leader who's in that position you just described, of on the back of all of the turmoil of COVID and the changes that are still coming as a result of that. Still coming. We're not through it. But it can actually be confusing and push people further into an either or mindset and that black and white thing where people then react to the other extreme and they say, "Well, that was not fulfilling and I have been wasting my life, and so now I need to just go and live on a farm and make my own bread." And they go to these other and that's a natural human, I think, in amongst the questioning. When we have lived in a world and been taught to think in a way that says, "Oh, it's either this or it's that," and we have dedicated our life to achieving and charging after things and being this high performer. So the moment we question that, we say, "Well, if that's wrong, it must be that I flip to the other extreme."
Yeah, and that's what not what we need.
What I would love is for leaders who have had that little aha moment, even if they're not fully there yet, is to realize that what we're suggesting is not the abandoning of what you previously did. It is about no longer operating in a way either as a leader, manager, whatever your role is, or from that perspective of your business. It's saying let's not engage in ways where it is a win-lose situation, where we engage that if I win, I'm sorry, it's going to be at the cost of you actually being stripped of dignity or value or money or power. That is not what's needed here. And I think that the ways we think, what we would call a designerly disposition, and the ability to say, what perspective do I look at this problem from? What tools do I bring? What thinking tools and frameworks could I use? If we as leaders take our responsibility to instead be, I am going to grapple with this business model or grapple with this problem that we're facing until I design a win-win, rather than just the first idea that comes to our mind or the first way that we say, oh, that makes financial sense. I'm going to run after that.
Yeah.
That's our job as leaders. So let's sit in that space. Let's conceptualize. Let's have the conversations and explore and design together till we create a win-win, not just until the first thing that makes commercial sense drops into our head.
And I'm putting my head in one of those leaders' minds for just a moment to hear you say, why not grapple and come up with a win-win? To me, that sounds like an adventure. It really does.
I agree.
It says, Hey,
Yes.
I have to admit, I was a little bit bored in the old ways of things. And now this idea that I can follow this new line of thought that has a lot to do with mine and what Bessi helps me bring in. Wouldn't it be amazing legacy a year, 5 years from now, that our company has a much better reputation, that we're certainly doing well on the market if we're public, and so forth. And I can do it differently and give myself credit for that. And then, wow. So again, I say, watch out, Bessi Graham, the phone's going to be ringing off the hook down there in Australia. And I'm teasing a little bit, but not really, because in my heart, as I finish this conversation, I have to tell you, this is something that you do that I have sought for my entire career, even before I went to college. I've always believed that leadership is something far better than anything we've ever squeezed into the millions and millions of books and articles we've written about it. There's something there that has not yet been said and done. And Bessi Graham, the leadership alchemist, is doing it. So thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Looking forward to that phone ringing, because I do want to have conversations. It is let's explore it, and I do think together we're going to come up with many of the solutions that, while we stay in these little silos and expertise, we can't crack the big
and there's
challenges.
Absolutely no fun in the silo anymore. It smells of old grain. So thank you again.
Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to inactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to inactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Oh, and one more thing. How could I forget? The book on practice as a way of being is available now in digital form, something that would be new, like podcasting to many of us. And it's a great way of learning more and more about what this podcast presented when Peter Vale and I originated it several years ago. So please come to www.mylibrary.world/practice, and you'll see what I mean. Thank you.